I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. And thanks to Marianne Canios and Connor at the Bridgehampton Museum for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to talk. So I've been driving myself crazy all week, trying to corral what I have to say into a speech within a certain framework of time. Because several things are on my mind. It's Passover today. It's Palm Sunday tomorrow. It's 50 years. What's that? Oh,
Turn my phone off.
okay. My phone's not even off. It will be 50 years next fall that I first set eyes on Kurt Vonnegut, if you can believe I'm that old. And also, most on my mind is our dire times. And I wanted to speak about that through Vonnegut's words because he's so appropriate about what's happening right now for us. And so I was so earnest that I got totally screwed up. And this is how I felt. And I'm going to quote Vonnegut. And you can take, I'll give you this quote. You can use it to apply to your response to what's going on right now if you translate it that way. When I sit down to write, I feel like an armless, legless man with a crayon in his mouth. That's what Vonnegut said he felt like when he sat down to write. And that's how I've been feeling all week. So, first, I'm going to tell you that a little bit about how I came to write this book. It was because I was his student, his friend, and taught writing all my life, and a writer. I was asked to do this book by Vonnegut Trust. So they wanted a book on Kurt's advice on writing. And the first thing I did, and 65% of it had to be his words. So the first thing I did was read everything. And I read everything that he'd published in his words that was in print. I did not read criticism, anything published after he died. I didn't want to use that. I really wanted to use his words as he wanted them to be used. So if I had published a book just on his writing advice, it would have been about 15 pages long because he didn't write about writing, he wrote. So the only thing I had to go on, really, that he advised about writing was a very small piece in the newspaper, in the New York Times, that I cut out that was published in 1980 something, early 80s. I cut out to use for every class I taught in writing after that, because it's very succinct. There are 8 pieces of advice. But the 7th piece of advice is Pity the Reader, from which the title is. And it means be kind to your reader, take them with you. He has a whole thing about how hard reading is. So anyway, but it's the first piece of advice that I based the book on and started it with. And it's a piece of advice that you can translate to whatever you do in life. And I hoped when I was writing it, I was aiming the book really not just about writing, but about doing anything. So the first piece of advice is, I forgot the first word. Find. I wanted to use the find. Find a subject you care about. Find a subject you care about, as though you have a subject you care about. So that's why it was important to say the word find. Find a subject you care about and which you in your heart feel others should care about. Really simple, really profound. Okay, so the first third of the book, I guess, probably, I followed the trajectory of his passion to write Slaughterhouse-Five. And then I keep following his life. So this book is a little memoir, a little biography, and a lot of advice about writing and about how to be as an artist. I would like to know how many people here have read a book by Kurt Vonnegut. Oh, okay, I'm speaking to the converted entirely. How many people have read Slaughterhouse-Five? Oh, good. If I'd known that, I could have changed my entire speech. All right. All right. Well, I want to say that when I finished doing all that research and reading books I hadn't read before, I learned a lot, and certain things stayed with me. And I'll tell you the line, the black humored line that popped out at me that I hadn't known before and that stayed with me. He was like a dead man in one respect. Everything was pretty much all right with him. So I want to come back to that line. Somebody remind me, because I want to come back to it when we talk about craft a little bit. Because he crafted everything, including that line. I'm sure. He didn't tell me, but I'm sure. So I have down here a little bio, and there were certain things I really learned about him that I'd only known a little bit when I did all this reading. If you've read Slaughterhouse-Five, or you read him, you know some of the things about what happened to him in the war, but I'm going to quickly go through, as quickly as I can, go through his life and how that kind of shaped his thinking and his work. So when he was a little kid, he always had a good sense of humor, a native sense of humor, but he discovered that he could get attention if he was funny. And he had an older brother and sister and parents who were pretty busy and pretty upper class and so on. And so he cultivated his entertainment talent as a kid. He also, his sister Alice, who was a little bit older than him, he and his sister Alice had this close relationship, and part of their closeness was that they enjoyed silly jokes together. And here's the kind of, and he's used these jokes in a couple of novels, silly jokes, not the black humor that you think of him as using, but just fun jokes. So here's one. You may know the answer to this. What is that fly doing in your soup? Who knows the answer? What?
Extra.
Extra. Okay. So while we were at Iowa, we knew he was writing Slaughterhouse-Five. He wasn't Kurt Vonnegut in capital letters. He was just Kurt. He was just one of the teachers. We watched him get famous over the time I was there. And so he was just another one of the teachers. But he was a very good teacher. So we knew certain things. We knew he had been of German-American heritage. We knew he'd been in World War II, had gone there, been captured, and taken to a prisoner of war camp in Dresden, and had survived the bombing of Dresden by the Allies. It was the first time I'd ever heard of the bombing of Dresden, and I grew up in a time when you heard war stories, you heard all about World War II. I never heard about it before that. Neither had anybody else. So, but I didn't know until I did research just how German his background was. His grandparents, his ancestors came to this country a little bit out of wanting a better fortune, but also because they were crazy about the American Constitution. They thought it was incredible. So he grew up with a very civic-minded background. His grandfather built a major building that's in Indianapolis called the Athenaeum. You can Google it. Google Indianapolis Athenaeum, and you will see a very beautiful building that's still used right in the heart of downtown. There's a huge Rathskeller in there. It's really Papa German in the middle of the 18th century. So you know, his mother's family owned a beer business, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm going to talk about some of the sudden changes in luck in his life that shaped his views early on. The Depression. My parents were a Depression generation, but Kurt was 10, living in this beautiful house that his father, who was also an architect, had made when the Depression hit. The consequence of that was they had to move out of that beautiful house, and his father lost his job, and his mother, who he says in one of his nonfiction books was addicted to money and status, went through massive withdrawal symptoms all through the Depression. Kurt had to be sent to a public school as opposed to his brother and sister who were sent to a private schools. But the upside for that for him was that at Shortridge High School, he had fantastic teachers because he said in the Depression, the cream went to the top. I mean, just to have a job was incredible. So he got really, really wonderful teachers and respected them. And he uses them as models for his books. And he really respected teaching. But they had a daily newspaper at Shortridge High School. So he learned to write by writing for his classmates every day. And the next day they would come to school and say, oh, I saw what you wrote, blah, blah, blah. So that was his first bit of learning how to write. It's a pretty good way to learn. After that, he went to Cornell. His brother majored in chemistry. And at that time, his father wanted him to major in chemistry too, because science was going to save us all. And he went, but he was failing in chemistry, but he was excelling while he was writing for the Sun, the newspaper at Cornell. He quit Cornell and enlisted. While he was second major change in his life, besides the Depression, while he was at basic training, he went home for a weekend on Mother's Day and with his sister Alice. And the next day they woke up to the fact that his mother had died. And she died from an overdose of barbiturates. And it is unclear whether that was purposeful or accidental, although she was addicted to them. And Kurt thought it was a suicide. So a few months after that, he goes to the war. And a month after he's in battle, the Battle of the Bulge, he's taken as prisoner of war along with all his battalion and taken to Dresden. So, oh, I'm forgetting what I'm supposed to be doing with this slideshow here. Oh dear. Here is something. Oh, well, okay. I got to the war already, so I'll show you this one. That's a letter home. That's a letter sent from home to him that was returned to his parents with the missing in action letter. It's unopened. He never opened it even after he got home. And his son has it. It's still not opened. I'm going to back up to my slideshow here. This is what's on there. Oh, it's your time. Okay. We'll just leave this on here for a minute. So those of you who've read him, you know that he has an exquisite sense of irony and looking at opposite side of the coin. I have a passage at the beginning in which I quote from a palindrome from a Swiss artist, "Dogma, I am God," which he would love. What I'm showing on the screen, I'm going to skip to this because there it is on the screen, is the Quonset huts where he taught us at the University of Iowa. As I was thinking about this, I was tickled thinking about the Quonset huts. So many people then were using Quonset huts at universities. I see people nodding their heads. You must have been in them too. They were leftover barracks. All these universities, didn't Rutgers have a leftover barracks? This is my husband and he taught at Rutgers. Okay, so they were cold, they were smoky, we were smoking our heads off. It was, not pretty, dark and gloomy. I mean, this is a black and white picture, but they were like that. But it was somehow at the time for me, it made me feel like sort of a warrior, like, okay, we're in the trenches, we're here writing, and this is what's important, not the glory. Now, when you go at University of Iowa, it's beautiful. They have a wonderful library. They give everybody a stipend. I was waitressing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so he was, I'll save the what was he like as a teacher, but you can ask me those questions. I'll skip that part right now. So I'm back to a little bit of chronology. So he goes to the war, all that happens to him. And when he comes home, nobody has heard about Dresden. He can't find anything about it. And that's almost, I think, if I think about his wanting to write about it, as important as being in it. Nobody had heard about it. He had been through this incredible thing, and nobody reported it in the States at the time. Okay, he went to, on the GI Bill, he went to University of Chicago, and he majored in anthropology, and he had a teacher, Slotkin, that he adored, although the teacher, he says, didn't give him the time of day, but he learned a lot from him. And he was very impacted by studying different cultures because he saw that different cultures had different ways to answer fundamental human questions. Why are we here? What do we believe in? Et cetera, et cetera. And that really also affected his teaching and his thinking about writing. So I do have some slides about that. I'm going to come back to that one. So these are taken from his thesis that he was writing. I didn't know this until I did the book. I didn't know this at Iowa. He was writing this thesis at Iowa because he never graduated from Chicago either. He went on to get a job at GE because he was getting a family. So he never graduated. So later at Iowa, he decides, I'm going to get that degree and I'm going to write this anthropology thesis. And he was trying to make the point that stories are like cultural artifacts and that they are just as valid as a shard of pottery to say what a culture is like. The stories that a culture tells themselves of who they are, make America great again, or whatever, is really important. And he had these graphs. Now, when I saw these, they're at the Indiana University Library. They're on the cheapest green graph paper. If you're old enough, you'll remember this graph paper you used as a kid in elementary school. And he has these diagrams. So the diagrams, wait a minute, I think there's the top diagram on the left. That's the basic diagram. So the line that's going across is there's no story. But the fortune is going to be under the line and good fortune, misfortune is going to be below the line, and good fortune is going to be above. And then he graphs various stories. So, wait a minute. So the bottom one is, what is the bottom one? I think it's the Garden of Eden. No, the second one is the Garden of Eden. They're in the Garden of Eden. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. They love each other. Mama, mama, and then vanished. He does a wonderful one with Cinderella. Okay, so this thesis was ridiculous. Most of it was taken up by a D.H. Lawrence story. I couldn't believe it. It was so funny. It was so funny. You couldn't believe that he seriously thought that they would accept this thesis, and they didn't. But in class, he's telling us all of this. He's teaching us this. He's telling us, man in hole, man in hole. That's down there. Get him out of the hole. Make it difficult. So now you can go on YouTube and find Kurt telling about the shapes of stories, and it's hilarious. And I highly recommend it if you like him. He just looks funny, you know, and it's great. All right. So I'm going to now talk a little about things he wrote, and I'm hoping that all of these have an echo for right now. In class, well, one of the things I want to say is that the anthropology thesis and anthropology in general made him very keen to revise stories in our culture and what they mean. So here's one that he tried out on us. Do you remember that the crucifixion story, Christ is on the cross. A lot of people were killed by crucifixion at that time. Christ was on the cross, and next to him were who? Who was next to him?
Barnabas. Yeah.
Two thieves. Two thieves were next to him, yes. Okay, so one day he told us that the crucifixion story didn't teach compassion. What the story really illustrated was that it was okay to murder somebody. Just be sure he wasn't well connected. He laughed until he wheezed, and he had a really great, funny laugh. And he was a smoker, so he wheezed. But I mean, he really had a. I will never forget him laughing that day. And so we laughed hard too. And then in a revised, more moral story, he said, and nobody would be crucified. And then just before he died, heavens would open and thunder would happen, and God would say, I'm adopting him. That story would teach that any nobody could be the son of God. So there it is, not the way I'm telling it, but the way he wrote it in chapter 5 of Slaughterhouse-Five. He had the idea, his crafting of stories. He said he crafted stories as jokes. It was a minor art form, and it was like a mousetrap shape. Boom, 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 like that. So here's a mousetrap. A black-humored mousetrap. I'm getting out of sequence, but it's all right. Black humor, he says, happens when laughter or crying is what a human being does when there's nothing else he can do. And he says somewhere else that he prefers laughing because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards. So this is, if you've read Cat's Cradle, you'll remember this. At Father's hospital, we had 1,400 deaths inside of 10 days. Have you ever seen anyone die of bubonic plague? He describes blackened bodies, swollen glands, stacks of dead. Father worked without sleep for days, worked not only without sleep, but without saving many lives either. Anyway, one sleepless night, I stayed up with Father while he worked. It was all we could do to find a live patient to treat. In bed after bed, we found dead people. And Father started giggling. Castle continued. He couldn't stop. He walked out into the night with his flashlight. He was still giggling. He was making the flashlight beam dance over all the dead people stacked outside. He put his hand on my head. And do you know what that marvelous man said to me? Said Castle. Nope. Son, my father said to me, someday this will all be yours. As I was writing this, I watched a 60 Minutes segment with a long interview with a doctor in Gaza. And I thought about this. Before, when I was still writing this book, I think, I went to a fledgling book club in New York City, a Vonnegut book club was supposed to be. And there was a young guy there, and he'd never met anyone who had known Vonnegut, so he was very excited, and he wanted to talk to me afterwards. And he said that when he was a teenager, he read every one of Vonnegut's books because they saved his life. And he found out that Vonnegut had majored in anthropology, so he majored in anthropology. And just as he was saying that, I was afraid to ask him the next question, like, what did you do with it, you know? And so what he had done, in fact, was he worked all over the globe for NGOs, starting in Sri Lanka during their civil war, first working for an organization that assisted victims of one side of the conflict, then for an organization that assisted the other side. A very Vonnegut-like thing to do. And at the moment, he was working for victims of Hurricane Sandy. A year or so later, he sent me an email. I'm writing from the disputed, this was 2015 maybe. I'm writing from the disputed Ukrainian-Russian border. I am working for the Danish Refugee Council, leading the planning and implementation of shelter for Ukrainian refugees displaced by the conflict. I thought of you today when I quoted Vonnegut. I was orienting a new aid worker. I told him, someday this could all be yours. I'm going to read one other little mousetrap here. This is from God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. All of these books I'm quoting from, I'm noticing, are before Slaughterhouse-Five. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that when he came home from the war, he knew he wanted to write about that experience, but he knew he wasn't capable of it yet. He needed to learn his craft first. So I have a chapter called Detouring Forward, because he wrote 5 novels, and if you read those novels knowing about what happened to him and what he was going to write, you see that the Dresden experience is leaking out all over these novels. So they're not, it's not just Slaughterhouse-Five. So this is God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, which is actually about money and wealth and poverty and kindness. And so Kilgore Trout is a character that, if you're familiar with Vonnegut, you'll know he's an alter ego. He's a down and out, bitter. I always think of him as a kind of wrinkled homeless guy, sci-fi writer that nobody pays attention to. So he has nothing to lose, so he says anything he wants. So it's through him that, so Elliot Rosewater, the protagonist, is talking with his father, the senator, in God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. You notice that Elliot Kilgore Trout once wrote a whole book about a country that was devoted to fighting odors. That was the national purpose. There wasn't any disease, there wasn't any crime, and there wasn't any war, so they went after odors. This country, said Elliot, had tremendous research projects devoted to fighting odors. But then the hero, who was also the dictator, made a wonderful scientific breakthrough. He went right to the root of the problem. Uh-huh, said the senator. He couldn't stand stories by Kilgore Trout. He was embarrassed for his son. He found one chemical that would eliminate all odors, he suggested. No, the hero was dictator, and he simply eliminated noses. Somehow, indirectly, this has a lot of resonance to me.
Yeah.
Okay. There are other playful things that Vonnegut used to entertain people while he was saying very serious things. And one was by language and one is by visuals. A couple of them, I'm going to give you a couple of language things. Then I'm going to tell you about another revision that's marvelous. This is from Cat's Cradle, where there's a lot of made-up words along with the made-up religion. And Bokanon is the guru, leader, preacher in that religion. Sometimes the pulpa, Bokanon tells us, exceeds the power of humans to comment. Bokanon translates pulpa at one point in the books of Bokanon as shitstorm, and another point as wrath of God. Here's a made-up word. Dr. Ed Brown coined a new word for Sylvia's disease, samarotrophia, which he said meant hysterical indifference to the troubles of those less fortunate than oneself. I'll say it again. Samarotrophia. You might want to use it sometime. Another revision he made was on a Palm Sunday sermon at Clement's Church in New York. And it's in his nonfiction collection, Palm Sunday, and I highly recommend it. It's really a beautiful piece of writing. So he said that the Sermon on the Mount was about being merciful, and it's one of the only good ideas we've received so far. He was, very much an idea man. This is one of his drawings from his drawings books. There is a ceiling on human thought, because he thought our brains didn't work very well. And there's a lot about how bad our brains are in one of his last books, Galapagos. So he also thought, back to Palm Sunday. So he took this phrase that even when I was a kid in Sunday school bothered me. So what's happening is Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead a few days before, and he's gone to visit Lazarus, and Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, are there, and Mary has this very expensive oil, and she wants to wash Jesus's feet with it. His feet are dirty and dusty. He's walked a long ways. And Judas, who is there and is going to betray him in 5 days, says, why are you using that expensive oil on his feet? Why don't you save it for the poor? Of course, Judas kept the money, and he was pilfering from the money. So he had a little ulterior motive, not just that. And in the King James Bible, the way Christ retorts is, he tells Judas, oh, I'm forgetting the first line, but it's, for the poor always ye have with you, but you do not always have me. He's saying, no, let her do this, because the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me. I never understood that line. So Kurt says when he was growing up, that line was used, he overheard it as a kid, with a lot of people justifying the poor. The poor, they're always going to be there, and they have too many kids, and they spend too much money, and blah, blah, blah. So he says it's a self-pitying line, and it implies that he's sick and tired of poor people. So he revises it, and he revises it as a joke. He says, maybe Jesus was joking. There have been a lot of translations. And the way he changes it is, and Judas, don't worry about it. There will still be plenty of poor people left long after I'm gone. I'm going to read a couple of other things, and I'm going to go back to this picture that I keep skipping. That's Slaughterhouse. That's my first version. That's my book of the original Slaughterhouse-Five, which has very front and center the Children's Crusade. That's Kurt and Jane on Barnstable Harbor in 1969. Slaughterhouse-Five had just come out. Their marriage was falling apart, which I didn't know then. I went to visit them. And he is having another major shift in his life, which is suddenly overnight becoming famous. Okay, I'm going to couple more things. This is a quote from one of his nonfiction books. It may be that the most striking thing about members of my literary generation in retrospect, will be that we were allowed to say absolutely anything without fear of punishment. Our American heirs may find it incredible, as most foreigners do right now, that a nation would want to enforce as a law something which sounds more like a dream, which reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. He says, I'm going to show you this. It's another playful thing. I'm just about through. Kilgore Trout again. Kilgore Trout takes a leak in the men's room of the New York City movie house, and on the wall there's a message, and the message is, what is the purpose of life? Trout plundered his pockets for a pen or pencil. He had an answer to the question, but he had nothing to write with, not even a burnt match. So he left the question unanswered, but here is what he would have written if he had found anything to write with. And then it's in the shape of a poem. What is the purpose of life? To be the eyes and ears and conscience of the creator of the universe, you fool. There's something funny about you fool, right? The creator, it seems, doesn't have eyes, ears, or a conscience. The creator, another one of Kurt's characters says, is the laziest man in town. So it's up to us. So it's up to us. So I have a last chapter in this book is on community. And of course, there's the upside and the downside being Vonnegut. The upside and why he longed for community so much was another good thing when he was a kid, is that his relatives all summered around this lake. And as a kid, he could go from one relative to the other. If you didn't like the food at one house, you could go to your aunt's or your next aunt's or whatever. But he also has a lot of stuff to say about how people banded together during the Depression. There were unions, they were called unions, and people called each other brother and sister, and they meant it. And what I see just beginning to happen right now is banding together. Some universities are finally banding together. Governors are banding together. We better band together, etc. I skipped over a part, but it's way too late now, of how prescient he was, how much he believed in writing as agent of change. So I'll just tell you about it really quickly. In his first book, Player Piano, there's a passage, I guess I'll just take the time to do it. There's a passage about the revolutions going on. I'm gonna miss where it is. There he has the first revolution is the Industrial Revolution. The second is, I'm losing my place. Okay, I'm sorry, we'll skip that. I've got to stop. So I will end with this. I've always wanted to do this, and I've only done it once in a class. There's a ritual called Boca Maru in Cat's Cradle. And people, it's the religious forbidden ritual. And people sit, and they sit with their souls together. Like, these are my soul. I can't put my arm out because of my shoulder is bad. But your feet are soul to soul, opposite the person. And then you chant this ritual. So I am going to chant some of the ritual, and I'm going to ask you to chant back as if you're my partner, okay? So it starts out in these funny made-up languages. I'll tell you when you can start. It's very short. God made mud, crooned Dr. Von Koenigswald. Job meet Matt, echoed Papo Manzano. God made mud was what they'd said, each in his own dialect. I will here abandon the dialects of the litany. God got lonesome, said Von Koenigswald. God got lonesome. So God said to some of the mud, sit up. Sit up. No, so God said some of the mud, to some of the mud. Yeah, go ahead. So God said to some of the mud, sit up. Ooh, it's fun to hear you all. See all I've made, said God. See all I've made, said God. The hills, the sea, the sky, the stars. The hills, the sky, the stars. And I was some of the mud that got to sit up and look around. Lucky me, lucky mud. Lucky me, lucky mud. Thank you.